Welcome back, Capital F football fans, to the O&O Sports YouTube channel. Today, we're continuing our season previews. If you're new to the channel, basically in these season previews, we're going to go over the 2023 recaps, what went right, what went wrong for each team in 2023, and then we'll get into a brief overview of the 2024 season, schedule, strengths, weaknesses, stuff like that. And then we'll get into our final grades and predictions for the upcoming season. And if you haven't voted on each team up to this point and you want to, be sure to go to the community tab of this channel and vote on the next team. By the time you're watching this, the next poll will be up for the next team, and you guys voted on it. Today we have the Tennessee Volunteers. Now, what went wrong for Tennessee in 2023? For one, time of possession was not their strong suit last season. I believe time of possession is a bit overrated for a stat. It doesn't really affect the outcome of games like some think it does, but it kind of does when you're as bad in time of possession as Tennessee was in 2023. They were 132nd. Obviously, when you can't see on the field, when you're bottom of the barrel, almost last in the country at time of possession, it's not going to lend to your favor, and you're not going to be able to maximize scoring opportunities, which was a bit of an issue for Tennessee in 2023. Another issue was the penalties. When they were able to extend drives, some of them stalled out due to these penalties, and that is just not acceptable. They were 127th in penalties per game with 7.5 per game, 125th in penalty yards per game with 65, over half the field in penalty yards per game. Obviously, that lends to the time of possession stat. Probably one of the big reasons why they couldn't stay on the field is because they were holding themselves back with those penalties, and we'll get more into that in a second. And the third thing that went wrong for Tennessee in 2023 is the pass offense just wasn't that great. I mean, it wasn't as bad as it seemed looking back, but going from Hendon Hooker to Joe Milton was a bit of a rude awakening for Josh Heupel and Tennessee fans alike. He wasn't a terrible QB. I don't want to say that. He just was not that great, and that is what caused him to transition midseason into that more run-centric, run-heavy offense that worked well for Tennessee last year, all things considered. And it was definitely not a great overall unit, but Heupel did scheme around it pretty well, was able to kind of minimize Joe Milton and make him have to make less plays. And that was what went wrong for Tennessee. What went right for Tennessee in 2023? For one, the rush offense was really good, like we just said. Tennessee's high end volume last season was due to that large shift in coaching strategy, so their numbers are going to be a bit inflated there, but for what it's worth, the rushing game was still very good. They had a three-headed monster in Jalen Wright, who rushed for over 1,000 yards, Dylan Sampson, who rushed for over 600, and Jabari Small, who rushed for over 400. They were 8th in rushing yards per game in the country with over 200 rushing yards per game, and they were 10th in rushing yards per attempt with 5.3 yards per attempt. They're just very good overall in the trenches in 2023. They were 20th in opponent rushing yards per game with 116.6 opponent rushing yards per game, and they were 13th in opponent rushing yards per attempt with 3.3. And last, for what went right in 2023, the pass rush was phenomenal last season. James Pierce Jr. was a monster, and he was that leader of that pass rush alongside Tyler Barron, who transfers out. But Pierce himself had 14.5 tackles for loss and 10 sacks. Absolutely incredible numbers from Pierce there, and he returns in 2024. Don't worry, we will talk about him in a minute. And as a team, they were 14th in sacks per game with almost 2.8 sacks per game. They were able to pressure the quarterbacks at an elite rate last season, and that is partly why they succeeded to the level they did. They had 9 wins last year. And that was a brief recap of what Tennessee did in 2023. Now on to 2024. For the schedule, they're going to have Chattanooga at home, NC State at a neutral site, Kent State at home, Oklahoma on the road, then a bye week, then Arkansas on the road, Florida at home, Alabama at home, and then another bye week, Kentucky at home, Mississippi State at home, Georgia on the road, UTEP at home, and then Vanderbilt on the road. Definitely more lenient than not for an SEC schedule. Don't get me wrong, there is still a lot that they're going to have to deal with, but it does have good spacing. You have some buffer games in between your hardest. You get to warm up for NC State with Chattanooga. You get to warm up for Oklahoma with Kent State. I hesitate to say you get to warm up for Alabama with Arkansas and Florida, but considering both of those teams probably aren't going to be great, if they can stomp Arkansas and then beat Florida convincingly, it's going to help them a lot going into that Alabama game. And it's at home. And then you have Kentucky, Mississippi State going into Georgia. Another two SEC teams, don't want to write them off, but Kentucky should be decent. Again, Mississippi State, new coach, new almost everything. So going to be hard for a team like them to beat a team like Tennessee, especially because it's at Tennessee. And the away schedule is pretty tough. I mean, it could be much worse, but they play NC State at a neutral site, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Georgia, and Vanderbilt. And their only real credible non-conference opponent is going to be NC State. You have three almost guaranteed, I would say 99.9% certainty that they'll beat Chattanooga, Kent State, and UTEP. I mean, Chattanooga's an FCS school. Kent State was virtually the worst team in college football last year, and UTEP is also not great. For their strengths in 2024, we're going to go back and forth on this one a lot. The first one is going to be Nico Iamaleava. While he is young and inexperienced, he has looked pretty good in his appearances thus far and over this offseason, and he was a great prospect. He showed off his ability in limited experience in 2023. Looked good in that game against an elite-ish Iowa defense. It was in the bowl game. I believe Iowa did have some opt-outs there, but he still looked good, and the fans wanted him throughout 2023. They got tired of Joe Milton, and I'm not saying you have to buy into what the fans are believing, but when you are bought in as much as it seems Josh Heupel and the Tennessee fan base is, I mean, it can only help. And with another offseason of development, it could see him potentially coming in and being a top 4 SEC QB. Now, that is a lot of hype, but he definitely does have that kind of skill. He does have that upside, potentially an all SEC caliber guy if he plays up to that potential in 2024. And for their second strength, we're going to go back and forth on this one too in this episode. It's the offensive line. And while they did have penalty issues in 2023, they return a lot of experience and have a solid amount of depth. And that offensive line was probably the biggest part in why that rushing attack was as effective as it was in 2023. They were able to scheme well, and that's saying a lot due to the fact that they kind of had to shift from a regular Josh Heupel offense to that run-heavy attack that they used in 2023. And for their third strength, it's going to be the running back room. They did lose Jalen Wright to the NFL this offseason, but they return a guy like Dylan Sampson, amongst others. But we're highlighting Dylan Sampson because we think he is flying a bit under the radar. Heading into 2024, he is a great all-purpose back with NFL upside. He has great field vision. He could be one of the better running backs in the SEC, and we do not see him being talked about that much. It could be because Tennessee might go by committee in 2024, but if they choose to give Sampson most of the reps, we think he could easily be up there in the SEC. But the room does have pretty great depth. They have 4 experienced backs returning, and I believe 1 or 2 freshmen coming in that are listed on the depth chart. Won't have to worry if Dylan Sampson were to go out a game or 2. And for their fourth strength, it's going to have to be James Pierce. He's probably the best player, if not easily top 3 in the sport. He's threatening to be the number 1 NFL draft pick. A lot of publications have him going number 1. That is how good of a player he is. He was on the 2023 All-SEC first team, and you could see him potentially being like a Chase Young in, 2020? Chase Young was a borderline Heisman contender, but James Pierce is going to demand a lot of the focus for offensive line in 2024. And for their last strength, it's going to be punting. Maybe not what you want to be strong at, but for what it's worth, Jackson Ross was phenomenal in 2023. That is Tennessee's punter. He was on the SEC All-Freshman list last season, and he was a Ray Guy Award finalist, meaning he was one of the top punters in all of college football last season. And that is it for the strengths for Tennessee. What about the weaknesses? The first one's going to have to be their inexperience on the defense. I hesitate to call this a weakness necessarily. They still have a lot of talent. Pierce is going to take a lot of pressure off of that front 7, but there's just not as many starters returning on that side of the ball as you might like to see for a team like Tennessee. And they bring in multiple transfers to kind of help with that depth. They bring in multiple in the secondary, hopefully to improve that depth there and give multiple looks for the defensive coordinator Tim Banks and secondary coach Willie Martinez. Hopefully just kind of take the pressure off that unit, get a few experienced guys in there to kind of boost that unit. And for their second weakness, it's going to be penalties. We already talked about penalties and how to fix those, but it is very hard to fix them completely in just one offseason. It still will likely be an issue. I mean, it's hard to imagine they completely fix that issue entirely in one offseason. But if they're able to go from one of the worst, like they were in 2023, to even middle of the pack in the country, it will be a huge improvement. It still won't be good necessarily, but still very big there. And if they can't, it's going to be a big worry for Tennessee. When the penalties affect the game as much as it did in 2023, it could be the difference between an 8-12 win season for them in 2024. When you're taking 65 yards away from the offense every game, you're not going to succeed, especially not in the SEC. So that is their second weakness. And their third is going to be field goal kicking. We kind of hesitate to call this a weakness also just because there's a bit of uncertainty. I mean, kicker Josh Turbeville was a freshman last season. I believe he redshirted. I believe he's coming in as a redshirt freshman, and he's slated to be the full-time field goal kicker in 2024. And he has no field goal kicking experience at the collegiate level to this point. There's no film on it. We can't really diagnose it at this point. So it could be something and it could be nothing. He could come in, kick 85% and it be fine, or he could come out in the first game, go 0 for 3 from under 30 yards, and it is a huge question mark going into that season. We will have to wait and see there. And that is it for the 2024 overview. Now on to the predictions. But first, as always, let's get into some keys to success for Tennessee in 2024. The first key to success is going to be trust Nico. I mean, he is a better all-around quarterback than Joe Milton was last season, and he can be really good in a traditional Heupel offense. He is inexperienced, so I get that. But his talent level does give your offense a better chance to win than relying on the run game like they did in 2023. And for their second key to success, they're going to need to attack the quarterback. This should be doable with a guy like James Pierce. That line in general should be the strongest unit on that defense. And if they can scheme to consistently put pressure on those SEC quarterbacks, it will take a lot of pressure off of the secondary, which is probably their weakest unit on that front. Not bad, but probably the weakest unit. And for their third key to success, Nico's going to want to share the wealth. You have several skill position players that have NFL draft type upside in Sampson, and you have wide receivers Brew McCoy, Squirrel White, and Tulane transfer Chris Brazzell in there, all with good experience, all with a lot of talent. And like we said, NFL draft upside, maybe not first round upside, but NFL draft upside nonetheless. And if you can spread the ball around effectively, you essentially open up those defenses, which will allow for more big plays, which is another thing that Tennessee struggled to generate in 2023. And if you can do that, it will probably push Tennessee over that edge that they couldn't seem to get over in 2023 into that top tier SEC team, maybe even appearing for an SEC championship. Who knows? Very possible, but we will have to wait and see. And for their final grades in 2024, the offense is going to come out to a 93.5. That running back room gets 2 thumbs up. Very underrated room. Nico should be amazing. I mean, we don't technically know yet, so we can't really give him the benefit of a Dylan Gabriel, Carson Beck, Brady Cook, but he is still very good. The wide receiver room is also very good. They struggled in 2023, which wasn't really their fault. Obviously, like we talked about, the passing game was abandoned a little bit in favor of that running game, and that offensive line should be good. Penalties could still be an issue, like we said, but as a unit, still should be pretty good. And for the defense, it's going to come out to a 94.0. Pierce and that defensive front could easily be the best unit in the SEC. We'll have to wait and see on how the rest of the line comes to Pierce's aid in that regard. And the secondary, like we said, is relatively unproven, but with the amount of talent they're going to have with the transfers coming in, shouldn't be that bad of an overall unit. And the special teams is going to come out to a grade of 87.0. Punter Jackson Ross should be in for another great year, but for the field goal kicking, it's going to be a bit of a concern. Literally a huge question mark. We have no idea what could happen there. And that's what's bringing that grade down to a high B. Still good, just depends how good that field goal kicking is before we feel like we can grade that unit any higher. As for coaching, it's going to come in at a 91.5. Heupel and his staff have shown what they can do. They're going to have a high-powered offense. They can have a great defense. Haven't shown necessarily how great that defense can be, but in 2024, they are primed to do so. It's just going to be a matter of effectiveness of that defense. If they can be like a Georgia or an Alabama in years past, then they might be a national championship, definitely a playoff contender. That's how good of an overall team we're talking. The biggest issue is really just the inconsistencies and the disciplines of the offense, which we could see improve in 2024. It'll just be a matter of if. That's the biggest thing, if. We don't know yet. And if they fix either of those issues even moderately, they could outplay that rating very easily. I mean, those two issues are big if they are extremely inconsistent or extremely undisciplined, like it seemed they were at times in 2023. But if they can fix both of those things, they should be in for a monster season in 2024. Not just great, a phenomenal monster. Any other synonym you can think of. And as for strength of schedule, they're going to come in at a 95.0. Definitely not easy, but whoever makes those schedules does need a raise for how good that spacing is. I mean, they probably made it 15 years ago with how they do the schedules. Probably had no idea what they were even doing when they made the schedule. But for what it's worth, it is very good in the year 2024. And overall, that's going to bring them to a 92.2, A-. Very overall sound team. You can see by these grades, very balanced. Will probably look more like the 2022 Tennessee than the 2023. Maybe not elite in most aspects, but very good to great in all of them. And that will lead us to the final prediction. The ceiling for Tennessee in 2024 is going to be 11-1 with a 7-1 conference record, which is entirely possible. We are not ruling that out. It is the ceiling, but they could easily hit the ceiling with how talented they are in 2024. They're probably going to be better than Oklahoma and Alabama this season, which are their two toughest opponents other than Georgia. And the floor for Tennessee in 2024 is going to be 8-4 with a 5-3 conference record. This would mean Tennessee probably reverts back to 2023. Something happens, Nico just isn't clicking, or something with the offense just isn't clicking, and they revert to kind of being a penalty-ridden team, undisciplined, and having other issues either defensively or offensively. Not sure that's going to happen. Pretty certain it won't. But that'll take us to our final prediction of 10-2 with a 6-2 conference record. While Tennessee should be a really great team, the inexperience of Nico Iamaleava could be the kryptonite. We're not saying it will. He could easily be very good, no issues, but there are going to be more established teams in the SEC. Oklahoma and Georgia are going to be established. NC State is also going to be a very good team. And Alabama, while they are in a bit of a rebuild, are still massively talented. And for what it's worth, we think Tennessee is going to have a very good season, obviously from the predictions and grades you've just seen. But they could end up being even better. It is very possible. And that is going to do it for the Tennessee Volunteers 2024 season preview. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe. Drop a comment if you disagree or if you agree with us about anything at all with this video. Also, be sure to go and vote on the next season preview. We will have that up in the next week. And if you're interested in our other season previews, you can find them right here on the O&O Sports YouTube channel. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.